Please find your seat. Welcome to all of you. It's very nice to see you here. And welcome as well to those of you who are joining us online. I'm Anthony Allen, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's event, a roundtable about the human condition, media art from the Kramlich collection, part 1, just out from Thames and Hudson. The human condition is more than the beautifully illustrated catalog of an art collection, albeit a preeminent collection gathered with passion and precision over 4 decades. It is more than that because through the specific prism of this collection, one of the foremost private collections of time-based media art in the world, the human condition uniquely speaks to the incredible transformations of our world in the last 50 years. In the vision of the artists in the collection and the words of the leading scholars in the field of media art, we catch reflections of ourselves as we transition with more or less ease through the various technological inventions that have punctuated our analog past and our digital present. And as the new technologies that surround us provide new ways of grappling with who we are, what we fear, what we desire, what we believe, in short, what it means to be human. And so it is a true honor to introduce the driving force behind this collection, Pamela Kramlich. Together with her husband, Richard, Pam embarked on a journey of collecting film, video, and media installation works by contemporary artists more than 35 years ago. Today, the Kramlich collection comprises over 200 works, housed in the Kramlich's home in Oakville, California, in a building designed by Herzog and de Meuron. The journey began in 1987, when Pam discovered Peter Fishley and David Weiss's video, The Way Things Go, a work of that same year, which she immediately acquired. How fitting is it that a collection devoted to the moving image and to new media, a field marked by constant innovation, would have its origin in a piece that precisely talks about perpetual movement, endless transformation, in a kind of joyful and confident careening into the future. In and of itself, this book is a remarkable testament to Pam's great curiosity, incredible steadfastness, and openness of vision. And it is only part 1. We have much to look forward to. Before I hand it over to Pam, a few words about tonight's event. The event is being live streamed and recorded, so you will be able to view it anytime and share it with others by simply following the links on 192 Books' website. That's 192books.com. Our speakers will have a conversation for about 45 minutes to an hour, after which we'll hopefully have some time for a few questions from the audience. And once the Q&A concludes, you'll be able to continue the conversation more informally, get a copy of the book signed, and also visit Paul Pfeiffer's exhibition across the street, which will remain open until 8 p.m. for the occasion. And finally, before moving forward, I wanted to thank Rudolf Stingel, whose paintings you see here, for letting us have this event in the middle of his exhibition. So now please join me in welcoming Pam Kramlich.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled that you're all here to celebrate this book with us today. And I want to thank Paula so much for having this idea to get us all together so that we could really have a chance to celebrate the people who have really made the most contributions to this effort, and that's the artists. And I want to say, lovely to have Shirin with us, who I've known for so many years now and watched your career blossom over time. Very exciting, and even to see you do wonderful performances, sets for performances in Salzburg. We had that wonderful chance to share that with each other. And Chrissie, you've been amazing as a mentor in the background for this collection. I want to thank you for really all the inspirational help you've given me. And Stuart, of course, you've been with us since the New Art Trust and with the Tate and now with MoMA, and that's been a journey that I really treasure because I've learned so much from you. And Dara, you were the very, very first artwork in our collection, actually. And also your work, Break and Transmission, Tiananmen Square, has really been a learning experience because we've had to learn how to take care of it. And that has, I think, benefited the entire field. No, but it's really wonderful. And so I think for that reason, and then of course, all the people who've been along the way, a collection like this doesn't happen without so many people like Paula who have opened my eyes to artworks that absolutely needed to be part of this journey and part of the dialogue that we've been lucky to be actually all part of over the years. So I can't thank you all enough for being here too. I see many, many faces in the audience that I've known for a long time, and I'm so thankful for you all to actually be here and to celebrate what you've done on this journey to make media arts as important as I feel they will be and go on being in the future. So I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
So I'll introduce myself. My name's Shannon Jackson. I'll be moderating this panel and also have the privilege of being the editor of the book that we're celebrating, which itself is a celebration of the Kramlich collection. I'll also say that to have collected these works that were risk-taking, and it was risk-taking actually to begin collecting them, to learn how to take care of them, and to now be at this stage where they're working so much on the goals of creating education, research, and public engagement, like tonight, so that we can think deeply about the field and celebrate the artists and curators who make the field. I did want to say a little bit more to add to Pam's wonderful introduction, which, as well as to Anthony's wonderful introduction, thank you so much for that, that the book, if you would like to peruse it, is documenting and interpreting the first of what we plan to be 4 exhibitions in the Kramlich residence in Oakville, designed by Herzog and de Meuron, where gradually more and more of the collection will be brought out under different thematic principles. So this is the first of 4 books to be published by Thames and Hudson. And in editing it, I had the privilege of commissioning essays from top leaders in the field, top curators, some of whom engaged with the exhibition in total, and many of whom each wrote small, shorter, potent, poetic meditations on each of the screen-based works in the exhibition. It also includes documentation, lush photography of artists who were presented in that exhibition, 2 of whom are with us tonight, Dara Birnbaum and Shirin Neshat. Stuart was one of those commissioning writers, as well as Chrissie, who was charged with writing a longer essay that engaged with the exhibition. So we'll get a bit of a sense of the content of the book here, but we'll also use this as a chance to hear from these luminaries about their sense of the history and future of the field, as well as the history and future of their own work. All right, so that's the agenda. And then we'll go to Q&A. So definitely hold on to those questions. We'll be excited to hear them. So first of all, to give you a little sense of the book, and to get a little sense of what it is to write for the book, we'll start maybe with Stuart. Stuart, you were charged with writing a piece on Pierre Huyghe's untitled Human Mask, which some of you may know is a confrontation with human catastrophe, as well as perhaps even, one might say, post-human meditations on what the nature of catastrophe might be. What did it mean to turn back to that piece, to think about it again, and also just any thoughts you had about what to see your beautiful writing in the context of everyone else's work in the book?
First of all, thank you for the invitation to contribute to the book, and thank you to Pam and Dick for everything that you have done for all of us here. And I just wanted to acknowledge, I think it's important always to step back a little and we're about, at MoMA, we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Open Circuits Conference that in many ways largely established video as a museum professional sort of forum. It was, one of many events around that time, but 50 years is not a very long time. And it's still amazing to me to be able to come to events like this and see this incredible family and community of, collectors, curators, critics, historians, and artists who were really on the very front lines at the beginning of an entirely new medium, who are today in a very exciting dialogue with emerging artists who have, been born as digital natives and are wired differently than certainly I am. But it's just an exciting moment to take stock and look back. And so to have the opportunity to contribute to a catalog of this nature was exciting. And I think Pierre, for me, like Dara and Shirin, has been a very formative artist. I think I first encountered his work probably around 2000 when they did No Ghost, Just a Shell, which was a collaborative project with Philippe Perreno. And what's particularly interesting about the relationship of that earlier project to Human Mask is this idea of a shell, a remain of something. And the more I thought about Human Mask, which I do think is one of his strongest pieces, but now looking at the work he's doing with AI and neural networks, it just feels like such a key bridge between the earlier work, which was dealing more with the experience economy, and his evolving work that he's making now, which is dealing with even newer technologies, and in particular, I think the conjunction of nature and technology, which is too often seen as a binary, when in fact they've always been entangled. So I also started to think a lot about Chris Marker, and it had never even occurred to me how deeply connected Marker's practice is to Pierre's. Yeah. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized no one's written about this, and there's really quite a lot there, and more than I could really address in the short form of these essays, but it was a very exciting opportunity.
It was a teaser.
Yeah, it was a really exciting opportunity to think about it. And that video now just seems so prescient in terms of the unbelievable moment of precarity that we are in, living through a pandemic and all the other things that have accumulated over the last few years. It does feel like we are on the precipice often. And I think the way in which he literally visualizes a world after human life that is captured by technologies that only humans could have created is a really fascinating kind of feedback loop to think about. And also set in the context of Fukushima after both a natural disaster and a nuclear disaster, again, I think highlights this conjunction of nature and technology and how productive that relationship has been and how totally destructive it has been as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And it was actually, I just thank you for bringing up the Chris Marker, because it was really interesting to see how many different, writers responded to the charge of writing a piece. And it was so interesting to see Stuart, I would say, even allowing himself to think some new thoughts and do some of the, great thinking for us. Shirin, I wonder if you might help us think a little bit about Rapture, which was in the exhibition and is in the catalog. Everyone who came to the exhibition at the home was enraptured by Rapture. People stayed in the gallery for quite a long time to take in your 2-channel piece that broaches so many important issues around gender and religion and ideas of tradition and modernity, but was made a while ago and now seems also, I just wonder how you think about what you were thinking about at the time you were making that work, as well as how you think about it now in terms of your longer career and even where you are now, given the importance of your voice on so many fronts right now.
Thank you. I want to first thank the Kramlich family for having my back in the art world and believing in me throughout the years. Thank you. Rapture was my second video, and I have to explain it because it came from the context of me working in photography and my frustration with the limitations of photography and how you remain an object. And it really became just a labor of my hand doing calligraphy over the photographs. And it seemed sort of hypothetical to my ideas in terms of what I was trying to do, which were so much about human conditions and so political, and yet they became like commodities. My turn to video was two folded. One is that it came with the video moving out of the studio with Rapture. We shot in Morocco with 200 people. I became a director. The video became a way of storytelling as opposed to those frozen images of photography. Although each image itself was like a photograph, I felt like a choreographer in terms of how a group of 100 women were moving in one direction in nature, and the men in white shirt in the fortress, and the sort of the aesthetic intervention, the composition, the theatricality, and that what's really interesting about Rapture, that I decided there would be absolutely no protagonist. It would be about a group of women versus a group of men. So it was my real entry in a very naive way into the medium of moving picture, but sort of inventing my own vocabulary. Also learning to use music, beginning, middle, and the end, with collaborations with cinematographers, learning how to edit something as crazy and peculiar as that. In terms of the content, and just want to go quickly, my previous work, Woman of Allah, was very much about the notion, this intersection between feminism, politics, and religion, but always about the subject of woman and how the women of Iran have always been a form of a battlefield for the men's ideology and religion and politics, and yet how consistently they've been so rebellious. So when you think about Rapture in a more evocative and less directly political way, which is why I like doing video, is that while the men remain in this construct of an architecture of a fortress, the women were in nature. And while the men remained as conformists to this masculine militaristic space, the women migrated from the desert into the sea, and eventually some got on a boat and left. For me, this was symbolically a meaning of liberty, taking your own destiny in your own hand, protest. And so in your last part of your question, I feel that this piece has a lot of relevance in many ways about how ultimately Iranian women have always been the most resilient, most rebellious, and always lived in a state of protest. So, yeah. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to a few, I think, of those topics, but I wanted to also hear from Dara, to have Dara, your piece, Attack Piece, an early piece, is also one of the first pieces that visitors encountered when they entered into the exhibition space in the lower part of the home. There's a Marina Abramovic first, a few pieces by Vito Acconci and Lawrence Weiner, and then we come into a gallery that has Attack Pieces screens with all of its documentation around it. And I wonder if you could think back to that early piece and what was preoccupying you then, but then also how it informs or doesn't inform so many of the works that came after.
I simply want to thank everyone who came west, came from the west to the East Coast. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're in a time here in New York City where it's kind of California dreaming to get out of the cold. So happy holidays. But I think that when an artist makes a work, certainly for myself, I have great pride in letting the work speak for itself. And I think that having written text documentation at this point in the collection, I think is actually a key turning point of taking what has grown organically, including my work, and now almost freezing in a way to both look back and look forward. So the idea of having 4 volumes from the same publisher, I would believe with you as the editor,
That's the hope.
Let's hope. Let's hope. This can. I think this is very good because this is a change in establishing a focus and framing. Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you want me to answer about one of my earliest works, I called it fine. I called it an exercise.
Okay.
And very quickly, if you want to know, because I'm getting older, so I'm allowed to say whatever I want to say right now.
Indeed.
Sorry. I came up with many artists a little older than me who I really respected, paved the way, and I would say basically through conceptual work, maybe, in a way. And Dan Graham had asked if I wanted to go up to Nova Scotia as a friend, because then there were groupings of people talking with one another. And the dialogue that I was witness to as a young woman was one that I felt of a male dominance. Sorry. But.
Yeah.
And I was around the house of David Askevold, who is passed, and Dan too, and watched these talented men, John Knight and Murray, talking about the arts and talking mainly about the currency of art. And I, as a young woman, I started to take notes. And I'm unfortunately someone who loves to challenge things. And I asked them because, God, I don't know how I had the nerve. I mean, really, I was a kid. Would you do this and that for me? I have a Super 8 and a still camera. This is a turning point. I will put myself in the center of the field with the still camera, and can you attack me with the Super 8? And I will try to capture you doing that. It wasn't all men, which is frequently interpreted that way. There were 5 active people, 2 of whom were women. And we did this exercise, and the exercise seems to, thankfully, based on astute collectors and museums, kept its voice. And I hope it still will. I think we are in very tough times. And I was teasing Dick that I've got to stay around to challenge a little bit more, because boy, do we need a challenge. And my challenge to you is whether or not we will do a 5th edition and put the letter E after human.
Absolutely.
And call for what is the humane condition of our times. All right? And that is my goal. We are all in motion. And that is why I think Pam and Dick understood that we are all in motion, whether the room we're sitting in, but the capacity early on in video to capture, especially when it came from good intention in the heart, the pulsations that were the currencies through our society. And the challenge is no one can keep up with those pulsations now. So how do you continue to use media and declare an independent voice? And I think that is the real challenge. And I think that there's a beautiful walkthrough that's been done of the thing. And we have outstanding pieces as named. But each one of those pieces to me is a pulsation, a beat of the heart. And it is the transitioning through them and the feeling of what it takes temporally to see how one tries to declare a moment of independence in a field that is oversaturated, actually. That's it.
Oh, wonderful. I love the word pulsation. And also as a teacher, many of us are teachers. I'm a professor at Berkeley as well. I think your last comment goes to Stuart's point too about what it means now for video and media artists or video and media makers to be making work as, quote, digital natives who may or may not have the same perspective or the same sense of video as a kind of material or a vehicle for critique that perhaps you might have had at the beginning. So that challenge about how to keep it relevant and to keep that edge, I think, is a constant one.
I never believed at first in what I called domestication.
Right.
And at one of the dinners Richard asked me, he threw the ball at me, how do you like being domesticated? Remember?
Wow.
And putting the work into a setting. And I said, Pam, remember, I don't like being domesticated at all. And then I wrote for you on that. And Gary Hill said, I love being domesticated. So you got a wide span of artists. But the point of it is, my God, I've learned how to really treasure over 45 years the protection that's provided for voice within cells that are constructed to be a domestic domain, a protective housing that is not existent in our culture otherwise.
Thank you. The domestic is about care, not only about neutralization.
I can't cook, but yes.
Thank you so much. Chrissie, maybe we'll hear from your voice because we gave you quite a challenge in asking you to write a longer essay that would take in more elements of the exhibition, and you took us, as these artists do, all over different regions of the world, as well as engaging with so many issues around human rights, around gender equity, around surveillance, issues of race and racial discrimination. What did it mean to take on this challenge? How did you sort of select, and what do you think now that you've sort of seen your piece now in the context of the book? Do you have thoughts that you might share?
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you to Pam and Dick for making your incredible collection, for all of us who've been part of it and in dialogue with you for so long, and for convening us here tonight, and congratulations on this beautiful book, which is an honor to be part of. I wanted to thank Paula Cooper. Paula, I think, was one of the first galleries to show video. And I want to also acknowledge the presence of three very important moving image artists in the room with us tonight. So we have Peter Campus, we have Nina Sabel, we have Anthony McCall, and those are the artists who I hugged and greeted when I came in, and maybe there are others too that I haven't spotted yet, but it's really, fantastic to have you here, because you, along with the artists on our panel, are the community and the reason we're all here. When you invited me to write the essay, it was in the middle of the uprisings of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, and both of those things were really starkly highlighting the inequities of power, the absence of care, speaking of care, and responsibility, and any kind of working social contract. And so, as I wrote in the essay, and at the time, it really felt like the moving image had the potential, because it was such also a sort of vehicle of activism at the time, to articulate a kind of new kind of ethics of the moving image somehow that felt very, very urgent. And so I decided to look at just a group of works from the collection from the 70s and the 90s that articulated not only two key periods in the moving images history, but also the West's kind of post-war transition towards this kind of decolonizing, a kind of globalized sort of situation that we find ourselves in now, in which the contours of which are just becoming visible, to try and really understand, by looking at those earlier works, how artists have addressed issues of power in the recent past, in order to imagine how we might imagine new possibilities for the future. So, the works I looked at from the collection they were all looking at the impact of slavery, colonialism, state systems of power and control. And they were mapped, as I looked at each work in relation to each other, some of which we wouldn't have thought would immediately connect to each other, were these the ways in which they were, all those issues were kind of mapped across what turned out to be like 7, to my mind, sites of sort of trauma and anxiety, some of which are historical and geographical, like the lynching tree in Louisiana, the former Stasi building in East Berlin, or the streets of downtown New York, or the others are located internally in the body or structured symbolically in game forms like Dara's attack piece and Valley Export's work. So, all of them engaged with the camera as through either a sort of retrieval of what was previously invisible or a kind of assertion of purposeful invisibility as a kind of form of resistance. So, the other thing that was really key when I was sitting at home writing this was it was a moment when COVID had forced all of us to retreat into our phones and computer screens, and our physical movements were restricted, in-person social interaction was restricted, and all the works that I chose to write about were involving and absolutely relied on physical space as an essential element to the work, both conceptually and also haptically, and that is really key. And it remains extremely important. None of the works can be experienced online, which is not to say that some that can, that's fine. But these works relied on physical space, which felt very urgent at that moment when physical space was being, really contested. And then in relation to that, I was also thinking about how the proliferation of corporate glass architecture, not only in New York, but in all cities, has created an environment that doesn't allow for an interplay between light and shadow. And so that relocates, what that does is it really creates a system of sort of hyper-surveillance in our social space. And it relocates our optical experience to extremely bright, intense, flat screens. And that, whether it's information, whether it's advertising, this is becoming so intense in our social environment in cities that they cause the space around them to optically disappear. And this slides moving image art into a kind of corporate visual spatial language that I feel very disturbed by. And so, unless the artist's work is specifically critiquing that environment and going into that environment, it can slide very easily into, the artist can slide into the role of kind of content provider, that dreadful phrase. So, it's almost like this kind of neurosis of transparency. I think, there's a lot of sort of very, very problematic aspects to that, within which moving images function as these kind of detached, floating signifiers, evoking not feelings but ideas about feelings, to quote Judith Williamson. So all the works that I chose to write about just dealt with the opposite. They were absolutely concerned with the opposite. And that feels, for example, David Hammond's Fat Free directly addresses that trauma of being excluded from social belonging. And what Christina Sharp talks about, the ontological negation that produces Black social and physical death. And so that performing that condition of no citizenship, that installation requires darkness. It requires you to go into a darkened room, and for the first 7 minutes of the piece, when you're standing in it, there's no image. And you are in absolute darkness, hearing the sound for the first 7 minutes, but not seeing anything. And that is critical, that acting out of a sort of form of surveillance, a refusal to be seen, pointing to everything, as Adrienne Edwards says, my colleague at the Whitney, is everything that's deficient on the level of the visible. That cannot be achieved with the flat screen. That cannot be fully understood if you just project that image against a wall in an otherwise lit space. So all these subtleties of light and darkness, physical space. Those are very, very key elements of the works that I chose to write about, which felt in some way under threat at that moment and continue to be. I think we have to continually think about that and worry about that.
Oh, thank you so much, Chrissie. I think also when you talk about the banality of corporatized images displayed on walls everywhere, to me that maybe that's the insidious type of domestication of the form. But also, thanks for the reminder too that we were putting together this book on an exhibition that we were required to close down during COVID. It was during that time, and also during the time of when the nation and the world were grappling more and more visibly and urgently around issues of race after George Floyd. And so that context was the context in which this was produced. And I think it's really fair to say that in so many ways, that context made us all think differently about the screen. And it made, I think, people working at the Kramlich collection really think deeply about what it was to care for this art form. And at the same time, your essay and other contributions all made very clear how incredibly relevant the works chosen for this exhibition were chosen by Pam Kramlich in collaboration with Avery Coleman, former director of the Kramlich collection, who was here with us tonight, that arrangement of works had to be sequestered for a while, and at the same time we could find hopefully new ways to think about the deep importance of their engagement and presence in our world, and we hope will continue. So I have a few more questions for the group, and we'll see how they take up questions, and then we'll perhaps hear more from the floor. I was really struck and moved, actually, Dara, when you said that you thought that this was an important shift for the Kramlichs and others in the field to begin thinking about the last 50 years, which Stuart referred as well to almost a kind of historical moment now, and what it means to think about an archive, what it means to tell the stories of the field. Telling history is such an important thing, but it's also a delicate thing. So I also wonder what anyone on the panel, and Shirin, you as well, what the opportunities are now that people are beginning to historicize what is often described now as a 50-year field, 50 years of practice. What are the great things about historicizing right now, and what might anyone want to register as a concern about how that history is told or not told right now?
I would just start by stating the obvious, that we're dealing with a fugitive medium, and to do the heroic work of, making the work, but to preserve it, to show it. I mean, seeing Anthony's line describing a Cohen and Chrissie show 20 odd years ago, changed my life completely. So I think, those moments are critical to what we all do and how we can recall these moments, because these are works that are networks of experience and technology and space and politics, and they cannot be reduced to a single object or image. So I think the complexity of articulating and preserving that network, and these are networked images, they are never singular moments. They're completely connected to so many other conditions, and it makes it a particularly challenging thing to do. So
Dara's even description of the exercise tonight, I feel like a good thing we're recording. We just got a little bit more sense of what that network was around which that work was produced. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
but
it's okay. But I'm just thinking, I remember Chrissie, actually, when I was still working at Tate, and we did an exhibition on Tess Dean in the Turbine Hall, and you had this beautiful line in your contribution to the book about cinema is going out like a flame, where film goes, the body will follow. And you made this direct link between flesh and celluloid, effectively, that was very poignant at that moment, particularly because celluloid was actively disappearing from artists' ability to use it. But to your beautiful point a moment ago, I mean, this question of, I think many people in this room have been deeply invested in structural histories, but now that we are in a moment where so many political and corporeal concerns and racial concerns are really on the table, these are not, mutually exclusive conversations. They're deeply connected. And the more we think about the apparatus of the corporate apparatus of video, which you've dealt with so brilliantly in your work, Dara, but to the apparatus of the body itself now and what that means. And I'm even thinking about, I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned, but to think about a tack piece in light of even, the Rodney King footage was shown in the Whitney Biennial in '93. And now we think about body cams and artists like American Artist and many others who are interrogating, racial surveillance. But that system is very similar to what you were engaging with in a tech piece, I think. So it's important to connect those dots.
I also think that, when you think about historicizing this medium, what are we historicizing? I mean, technology is not neutral, and also film and video were very different mediums and different worlds in, say, the 60s and 70s when, some of the artists in the collection and some of those present were making works like, Nina and Peter working with video, Anthony working with film. And there's something very specific about those respective mediums that mean that the sort of conceptual nature of the works are absolutely defined by those histories and relationships to, on the one hand, cinema, on the other hand, television. Now we've got a very different situation. Now we have a much, much more fluid interchange between film and video and what that means. And even, we just brought a work by Ayana Dozier into the collection, a young Black artist who is making work on Super 8 and also making photographs where she's making her own paper and chemicals. So you've got this really interesting relationship going on now between materiality and immateriality, because that's happening at the same time as Legacy Russell's glitch feminism is talking about online space. And I think that anxiety, that certainly when I wrote that, is not there anymore in the same way. It's completely changed. And that's what's interesting when you talk about historicizing the medium, right, or mediums, plural. And, what is video? Because we have Michelle Silver here working with expert on Bruce Conner and Bruce Conner's films with the Bruce Conner Foundation. And Bruce was an artist and filmmaker. He made films, but those films contained so many images from television and media, and then now we see them mainly on transferred to video. But what does video even mean now? What does television mean? What does film mean? Paul Pfeiffer's installation across the street is a video installation, but is it really? Because it's completely constructed through a cinematic language. It's completely constructed through the insert shot, which is one of the sine qua nons of cinema. And that's one reason why it's so compelling, because, the layers that he's unpacking are brought to us through this incredibly sophisticated understanding of the history of cinema and the way that it works. So, there's so much, I think, in these histories that, are being rewritten almost as we speak. Mm-hmm. And artists are always driving those changes.
They're rephrasing the history almost.
Yeah. And Shirin, do you have thoughts about this, the history question, but also now thinking too, as somebody who travels between the cinema and the video art world as well?
Yeah, as you were speaking, I'm educated in the US, but I would say that my work is not really based on art history so much. Mm-hmm. And the very essence of my work, even the photography, it's still very rooted in non-Western aesthetics. And so my transitions from photography to video to cinema, I've made 3 movies, has been for me to explain myself the language of those mediums and the relationship to the audience, and in a very primitive way. Because for me, photography has been about capturing a single moment and this one emotion and this one event, and have that be very permanent. With video, I like the freedom of being able to give the audience something very immersive and experiential that they could the space could have a character, the people could, that you could create these ingredients that together creates a story and engages them in very different way than a photography would do. It's so much more ephemeral. And so then I moved on to cinema because I'm very interested in Iranian cinema, but in cinema in general, and how you could address a very different audience that pay to sit in the movie theater, and therefore their relationship to that work is very different than a gallery that is so open and so enigmatic, open for interpretation. So when I'm making videos versus films, as I'm doing constantly, I'm always asking myself, who am I making it for? What is what are the boundaries in terms of this language working for galleries and museum? For the duration, for the enigmatic part of it, for the comprehension, and for the movie theater, people have very limited attention span, and no matter how artistic the film is, and the pacing and the development and all of that comes with the market. So, but I've sort of had to, because I'm not trained as a photographer, not a video artist, and a filmmaker. So I've had to just sort of work through the process, both in terms of the conceptual strategies and the delivery of the work for a movie theater versus a gallery museum. And so it's been a real process.
Thank you. So one topic that has come up from all four of you, but that I just think it might be nice to lean into for a minute here is the topic around the use of video as a vehicle for making art, but also the way that video artists in particular have used their work to critique to some degree the impact of the screen or the impact of new technology. This has, all of you have brought this up in different ways, but especially in relationship to Dara's work, who was so early from the beginning, not simply using the camera, but say, worrying about the politics of the camera, about who is looking, who is attacking, all the way through to who is surveying and what the conditions of surveillance are. So I wonder if generally, whether Dara, perhaps you might lead us off as, to some degree, the goddess of this intersection of somebody who really thinks about the politics of the camera while using a camera, and maybe others about this conjunction.
I think it is important. I had a very bright assistant who just left, so I won't mention his name. We started to get in a little argument. I think he's in his late 20s. He's a real native, of technology. I'm not. He couldn't understand the difference between a television set, monitor, when I would refer to monitor. I can't tell you how important it was for those of us starting out, let's say in the 80s or such, to be specific about that. Because we were thrilled, not all of us, not everyone, but some people thrilled. There was such a thing as a monitor meant all of a sudden there was a designation for conveyance of art. Of course, some people embodied television in their art, absolutely. I call this actually a moment. I think this is an era of slippage, and that's my word for it. I do not think we stand on firm ground. I think our need for categorization, forgive me, I came out of COVID, about 3 weeks of COVID, is like our need to categorize, to fixate, is not going to meet the needs of where we're going right now, actually. And I see too many artists, I'm sorry for me, in media who put such a prominent focus on the type of media they can get in hand, the power of 4K, 6K, wherever they're going, how this has to be, to me is almost like doctors and insurance companies, together or something, running into the future. For me, great artists historically took whatever was in hand because What was the most important was the heart, was the concept, was the need of what had to be said in the way. So if Eisenstein and then Godard after that said, one cannot call it revolution when one is making revolution. There is no need, I think, and I'm sorry, in this world right now, to fixate on things that are slipping in our society. And I don't say that's a bad thing. It's an age of fluidity. And therefore, it is important, I think, to recognize what tools. I grew up on Walter Benjamin, of what tools we're holding in hand, and who is the producer or not the producer, and who becomes the producer. So yes, very, very important, but it's not, to me, important in artists' hearts to be able to achieve what's seen in a society, a technocratic society, as the weapon of choice. The weapon of choice is our consciousness as streamed through whatever medium is available to us to keep that expression going.
Thank you. Responses from the...
To add to that, I completely agree. And I think that what disturbs me sometimes about equipment is how expensive it is. And I really think that that's problematic because it limits the places in which these works can be shown. There are places, communities, and countries that have absolutely no access to the sort of high-end, expensive equipment that we may be used to in New York, for example, or even in communities and neighborhoods and spaces in New York City itself. So I think the politics of that and the expense of equipment are very real and very, important to address, because otherwise that really limits our ability as curators and artists to operate in social and cultural space in a way that is creating a sort of discursive site, a place of gathering. And what those places of gathering are, online is easier. In real life, what are those spaces of gathering, and how can we create those spaces of gathering in ways that are not instrumentalizing people, dependent on large amounts of money to get 10K video? We don't need that. We don't need that. But what we do need is shared experience of artworks, which create a kind of dialogue between online space and real space, and really start to reflect the complexities of the different communities and the different spaces, of which museums are only one and cinemas are another. And, other kinds of spaces are as important. And so to kind of make sure not to, how do we break down the sort of hierarchy of spaces and equipment and all of that? That to me is also very critical.
I gotta say, if you don't mind, a quick story because it keeps coming in my head. One of the nicest moments I've ever had, I think, I was in St. Lucia. It's a place I loved. I loved the circle. And there was an independent, mainly Black run. I didn't even know if it was a cable TV show, to be honest with you, out of a hut almost. And they heard I was in town, big deal, and asked me on, to talk about video, my work, this and that. 2 days later, I'm walking through this town, small town, where the house was. A young girl comes up to me in English, says, "My mother's here. She loved you," right? So it's so great, thank you. Thank you. I said, well, could you tell me maybe what I said, something I said that might have stimulated her, affected her? Oh, no, we live on the other side of the mountain. We only get image, we don't get sound.
Really?
I only say that about spaces and the earth, everything. I was quite astonished, But let's say something got through, something was conveyed, and how do we convey these things where we allow them to breathe in the way they're meant to breathe, when most of us, sorry about this too, are under a somewhat corporate control right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So just bringing things to a close before I do and we get your questions, this is a group that is always active and has a bunch of projects going. Maybe each of you could briefly say something about what you're working on now for the group to look forward to.
I'm co-curating the next Whitney Biennial.
That.
with Meg Onley, who is a wonderful curator based in LA, and with whom I've had a dialogue for a long time. And Meg and I are in the middle of the process, so we can't tell you anything about it yet. But that's opening in spring 2024.
Thank you.
Many things, but a major show opening in March, very appropriate to this conversation, called Signals: How Video Transformed the World, which will be the largest survey of media art in the museum's history. So opening March 1st.
That. Thank you. Dara, Shirin?
Thank you for putting me in. Oh, sorry, Shirin.
Yeah, Shirin.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm preparing an exhibition for New York at Gladstone Gallery. It opens in January.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Dara, what's your next project you're most excited about?
His project.
Yeah,
his
yeah,
project.
Yeah.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the projects I've had. I don't know if by contract I'm allowed. I will be working with a corporate sponsor of Prada for both Milan and Tokyo. But as I am doing that, my greatest hope is I've got it's a good time to challenge oneself, isn't it? And I hope the projects will come, I think, don't they? They come in waves. They come, they don't come. And, and we're hoping for projects. I'm thankful. Thank you for Prada for reaching out to the arts and the architecture I'll be working. I used to be an architect a long time ago, delightful. You had a face, Herzog and Demure, and now I get to do that,
Right.
and those things that delight me. I do like in terms of architecture coming up to understand how we are dealing with our own need for expression during a time when so much is being produced in such a way,
Right.
and how to divide it.
Great.
Yeah.
And to think
Maybe
deeply
make
about
questions
space as
or-
well.
What?
And to think deeply about space as well, chiming with much of what Chrissie was saying too. Are there questions from the floor before we close and move things more informally? Any thoughts or comments or questions?
I'm going to say something. I think this is, I have already said something. I'm going to tell you that I really think this is a time. I have begged, and you were in agreement. It is so important to hear your questions or your engagement. Let's break down these barriers.
I know, we're
know,
so far away
really.
from you. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Do we have a microphone, or I can pass mine? Fine. Yeah, here, it's fine. Just to be sure that the people, if there's people on YouTube, get to hear it.
Sorry. No, I just had a question. You were talking about that the video equipment is so expensive, but I was also thinking about just the power of everybody's phones, going back to George Floyd with that video. And so that I think if artists don't have a lot of money, they do have access to opportunities for, I mean, I think there's a lot, I just wanted to ask that it seems like there's a wide spectrum of materials available to artists.
Yeah, I mean, turned that point into a question about what we think about the form, given the ubiquity of the smartphone, maybe.
You can film on your phone, but if you want to show something in physical space, that's what you need a video projector or monitors, or, that's what I was referring to. Because of course, to actually make a work can be inexpensive. It's the showing of it.
The installation spatial component, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say though, I think, this goes back a little bit to some of the things Chrissie said earlier, but one of the works that will be in Signals is an early video by Fujiko Nakaya, and she was part of a collective called Video Hiroba, and she literally brought equipment to the front lines of a strike. And there was this incredible conjunction of technology and protest. It was pretty unprecedented in that moment in Japan. But I guess, I'm looking at what Tiffany Shaw is doing now in Hong Kong with her iPhone. And it's not just the footage, it's really how she frames it in the installation and very carefully dissects a movement of which, she was a major part as an activist. Again, it's just interesting to see these patterns and urgent political moments like the one we're in now, and how artists do continue to push back against corporate and state control of media and find ways in somehow, whatever that is. And I mean, I'm thinking of Dara's Tiananmen Square installation, which is, a real hallmark of the Kramlich's collection. But the moment the broadcast was shut off by the state during the Tiananmen Square protests, students and artists found other ways with fax machines or whatever tools were at their disposal to get the word out. And I think that goes exactly to the point several people are making.
Right. So it is also that if video artists are using the iPhone, they're also putting quotation marks around the iPhone too, of sort of what is this? How is it functioning socially? Great. Thank you for asking. Any other questions?
Also, just to respond to that, Hito Stell talked about, the poor image and the fact that an iPhone kind of image represented truth, since everything can be manipulated so much. There's this assumption that, a rough iPhone image meant you were actually there, and so that things like Walid Rad's works around Arab Spring and all of that sense that of instant recording, which is, a tool for both activism and art, is something that absolutely began in the 70s and has gradually sort of, the protests of 2020 were the way in which everyone was telling everybody else where they were through their phones and through Instagram stories. And now we're going here and now we're going there, allowed people to gather in ways that would have been impossible before. And I think that nexus between activism and the moving image is something really interesting, and goes right back to video's roots in kind of activism in the early 70s, and Video Freaks and all of that. So I can't wait to see your show.
I want to give a little credit to some of what we consider the earliest people that were dealing with video. They were taking, at that time, I'd say, they called it the cast-offs of the industry. Whether Namjoon able to get his hands on Portapack, but Michael Asher out of the West Coast in a different way, taking anything Hollywood threw away, in a way, or Lanesville TV establishing a low power up and down the road kind of circuitry of conversation or talk. And so there's some brilliance, these moments of when one understands that these are tools, and there are a lot of tools around right now. And I don't think there is any correct tool. That's what it is. What is correct is what's in your hands and your heart to work with at the time.
Which goes back also to perhaps Stuart's first point about this being a fugitive medium, and the ways in which it makes use of available tools, including cast-off tools, and that fugitivity does nothing to diminish its importance. And in fact, it's sort of from that scrappiness that its impact comes. So I will bring things to a close for a moment with thanks once again to Paula Cooper Gallery, to 192 Books for producing this event, to the Kramlichs and the Kramlich Collection for giving us a reason to gather. But most importantly, I hope you'll help me thank these incredible luminaries of the field for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.